Dear Senior Twos, I am so excited to have you once again on this platform. You recall, all of you, those that were with me in the first episode, we introduced the concept of the scramble and partition for East Africa, or for Africa in general. And we did mention that time came, especially during the 19th century, that Europeans picked a lot of interest, wishing that African countries should become their colonies. What resulted out of that interest was what we call colonialism, what we call the scramble and finally the partition of Africa. We did also mention in the previous lesson that for that matter, Uganda was not spared, Kenya was not spared, because these two, Kenya and Uganda, became British colonies. Then for Tanganyika, it became a German colony, especially around 1891, when the Germans finally took over. Now today, I wanted us to look at the various players, the various people that participated in the scramble and partition, the colonization of East Africa. What is it that I want us to talk about in this lesson? We want to look at the various players, like the missionaries. Because we say among the methods that were used by the colonialists, okay, they included the use of missionaries. So today we want to see what roles did the missionaries seriously play. Number two, we also want to look at length the roles that were played by the explorers, the people who came to discover the new physical features in East Africa. What roles did they finally play that helped in one way or the other in the colonization of East Africa? And we shall also try our level best to also identify the roles that were played by the chartered companies. Because a question will come requiring you to describe the roles played by maybe the chartered companies. In UNEB 2020, of your elder brothers and sisters who are waiting for their exams, there was a question number 7, which required learners to discuss the roles that were played by the chartered companies in the colonization. So, having attended today's lesson, I know all of us will be in position to answer UNEB, inshallah. Let's begin by looking at our friends called the missionaries. And we try to analyze the roles that they played. On your screen, right there, you have above, you have a very wonderful illustration. What you're seeing in your background right now, ladies and gentlemen, is a hospital. The first hospital that was built by the Christian missionaries. What role did the hospitals play? What you're seeing again right now on your screen are schools. One school is called Mount St. Mary's, Namagonga. Another one is called King's College Budo. What roles did they play in the colonization? Therefore, we need to identify, we need to note. Is it the just built buildings which had no role in the colonization? You and I, at the end of today's lesson, must agree, must come to an understanding that indeed, while the missionaries were in East Africa, they took part in very many activities. And these activities, at the end of the day, resulted into what we call the colonization, the actual colonization of East Africa. Yes, I was saying that One of the schools there is called Mount St. Mary's, Namagunga. This school was constructed in 1902 by the Christian missionaries, the Catholics. What role did that school play? On the other side, the right-hand side, that school is called King's College, Budo. King's College, Budo was constructed in 1905 by the Church Missionary Society. So we want to identify and understand what roles did they therefore play in the colonization. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to look at the roles, the various roles that were played by the Christian missionaries. Yes, we need first of all to identify who were the Christian missionaries. The Christian missionaries are a group of evangelists that mainly came to East Africa purposely with the name of spreading Christianity. They were the second group of Europeans who came to East Africa during the 19th century after the explorers. These missionaries came under umbrella groups such as the Church Missionary Society, such as the London Missionary Society, such as the Holy Ghost Fathers, such as the Verona Fathers, such as the Mill Hill Fathers. These people came with the intention of spreading Christianity, but whether knowingly or unknowingly, their activities finally led to the colonization. Some of the Christian missionaries that came to East Africa included personalities such as Father Laudel Mapel, or famously known as Father Simeon Mapel. It included people such as Alexander Mackay. It included personalities such as Dr. David Livingstone. You see? So, during their stay in East Africa, what roles did they play? When you look at your work on your screen, ladies and gentlemen, missionaries always called upon their home countries to come and occupy the areas where they operated for protection from their rivals. What role did this play in the colonization? When missionaries invited their home governments to come and protect them in the areas where they were operating, indirectly they were giving the colonialists a blank check to come and colonize. You need to be extra bright. You need to open your eyes, your inner eyes, to see the kind of work we want you to understand today. Mention an activity, then you show how that activity contributed to the colonization of East Africa. Missionaries also took part in the overthrow of some leaders who were rebellious. This helped the colonialists to come and easily take over without a lot of resistance. For example, in Buganda, Christian missionaries participated in the overthrow of Kabaka Mwanga. Yet you know that Kabaka Mwanga was a resistor. This meant, therefore, by taking part in the overthrow of such leaders who were rebellious, missionaries were paving way. They were preparing the way for the European colonization. Missionaries also always settled in places where their home governments had a lot of economic interests. Interests such as the fertile soils, interests such as minerals. Missionaries always identified only those areas of economic potential which their home governments could do what? Which their home governments could come and exploit. And guess what? This paved the way for the colonization. Remember, we want to see what roles did the missionaries play in the colonization. Missionaries also didn't stop there, but missionaries went along and divided Africans along what we call religious lines. You see, Some of the Christian missionaries were Catholics. Some of them were Protestants. So, Protestants converted very many Africans to their faith, the Protestant faith. Very many others, Africans, got converted to the Catholic faith. So you see, when we were talking about the methods that were used during the colonization, we said missionaries divided Africans along religious lines. Yet when we were looking at the methods, we said Europeans used divide and rule. In Uganda, we experienced religious wars during 1885 up to around 1900. These were years that were characterized with religious wars, divide and rule. Missionaries also participated in the signing of what? Signing of treaties, which treaties were later on used by their colonial masters, were used by their home governments to come and claim that such areas were theirs. During the signing of the 1900 Buganda Agreement, a Christian missionary called Dr. Alfred Tucker, or Bishop Alfred Tucker, took part and assisted in the signing of the 1900 Buganda Agreement, one as an advisor and two as an interpreter. I don't want you to forget that these treaties were later on used by their home governments to claim for such areas. You see, missionaries were participating in the colonization. Missionaries also took part in the financing. They provided the finance. They financed chartered companies. Yet chartered companies were also here working in the interest of their home government. At one time, around 1899, the Imperial British East African Company ran bankrupt. The Church Missionary Society, which for this matter had come to spread Christianity, injected around 5,000 pounds, such that Ibeco could still operate for some more time or some more years. That way, by doing so, the missionaries were assisting in the colonization of East Africa. Missionaries also learned what we call the local languages. I want you to test yourself. Can you explain how that led to the colonization? Yes, missionaries learned the local languages, and later on, those that had mastered the local languages were later on hired by the colonial masters to work as interpreters or translators during the times of colonialism. That's why we are saying missionaries were not innocent. Missionaries had also a hand in as far as the colonization of Africa was concerned. Missionaries carried out a lot of exploration, I beg your pardon. They carried out a lot of exploration, discovering the economic potential. And guess what? These people reported to their home governments about the economic potential of the African countries. These reports became very impressive. Remember where we came from. We said the Europeans scrambled for territories because they were in need for raw materials in form of minerals, in form of the fertile soils, and so on and so forth, in terms of the physical features like rivers and lakes, the fertile soils, and so on. Therefore, we are saying missionaries, because for them they moved from one place to another, they always identified those areas that had great economic potential, and these reports became very impressive, resulting into the increased appetite for colonies in Africa. missionaries didn't stop there, but these people introduced Western education, which Western education resulted into acquiring of collaborators. So we can say missionaries introduced Western education, which helped to create a group of African collaborators. When you look at the schools that I showed you in the previous clip, Mount St. Mary's, Namagunga, King's College, Bodo, Mengo, Secondary Senior School, and many others, these schools became centers that could produce a group of the badly needed people known as collaborators. Seneca Kungulu, Apollo Kagwa also became agents of colonialism, having learned a lot of English, having learned the Western culture from the schools that had been constructed by the Christian missionaries. Missionaries didn't stop there, but missionaries also constructed roads. They improved the infrastructures. They constructed the bridges. And they even took part in the construction of the railway line. This was an activity. Now we want to see how did this lead and contribute to the colonization of East Africa. You are going to tell the examiner that Christian missionaries constructed roads or improved infrastructure such as roads, railways, bridges, which later is the movement of the colonialists from one place to another. When missionaries came to East Africa, they introduced what we call cash crop growing, or they supported the agricultural sector. So we can say missionaries participated in the promotion of cash crop growing, upon which the colonial economy was to depend. When missionaries did come to East Africa, they made sure they introduced cash crop growing. The growing of crops such as coffee, such as cotton, such as sisal, such as rubber, and many others. At the back of their minds, they knew that these cash crops were going to be sources of income to the Africans. Yet these people, the colonialists, need a lot of taxes from the people that they had colonized. Therefore, that's why we are saying missionaries are to blame in as far as the eventual colonization of East Africa was concerned. We are saying they introduced cash crop growing, upon which the colonial economy later depended. Missionaries didn't stop there, but missionaries also went ahead and introduced what we call legitimate trade. Slave trade reached a time and it became an illegal business. It became an illegal business. And therefore, when it became an illegal business, missionaries thought it wise. They introduced what we call legitimate trade. Now, legitimate trade turned out to be very profitable. Legitimate trade became very profitable, and in the due course, it attracted the colonial masters to come and eventually take over from who? And eventually take over from the missionaries. Away from that, we can also talk about the missionaries. The missionaries introduced new languages, such as what? Such as? Very good. Such as English. They introduced new crops new languages such as French, such as German, such as Latin. Very good. Which later is the communication of the Africans and the colonialists. Dear learners, I want to emphasize that a question of this nature, or what we are looking at today, we are looking at a topic that requires what we call critical thinking. where you must identify an activity and you show how that activity contributed to the colonization of what? Of East Africa. So we are saying that missionaries played a lot. Next point, we want to see that missionaries went ahead and they abolished what we call slave trade. Indeed, slave trade was bad. Slave trade was the buying and selling of human beings as commodities, where you could hand over like 5 men, energetic men, in exchange for a shirt. Human beings had been reduced to that level. However, when missionaries abolished slave trade, this is what I want you to see. It created a conducive atmosphere. It created a very friendly environment for colonialism to take place. And indeed, this led to the actual colonization of East Africa. Missionaries didn't stop there, but missionaries also went ahead and built what we call mission stations. They constructed mission stations. For example, at a place called Rabai here. Another station was established at Tabora in Tanganyika. These later on were used as colonial administrative centers. These were later on used as colonial administrative offices. By the time the colonialists came, they had nowhere to operate from, but the missionaries had already constructed for them the mission station. So we are right to say that missionaries, by constructing the mission stations, they went ahead and eased the process of the colonization. These same missionaries went ahead and provided to their home governments information regarding which societies were hostile and societies which were very good, societies which were accommodative, which helped their home governments to prepare accordingly. By the time the British came to Uganda, they knew that particular tribes were hostile, yet others were friendly to them. Therefore, they prepared which approach they should use. Missionaries also constructed schools. We have already mentioned the schools, but above all, we wanted to mention, and we say that missionaries constructed hospitals, hospitals such as Lubaga, such as in Zambia, such as Lubaga, which eventually resulted into the treatment of what? Which helped in the treatment of the colonialists when they fell sick. Dear learners, I want you to become very, very, very civilized people who know that missionaries played a very big role in as far as the development of East Africa was concerned. But nevertheless, the activities of the Christian missionaries helped in the colonization of East Africa in one way or the other. So should a question come requiring us to talk about the role played by the missionaries, we should be able to answer such questions. We should be in position to answer such questions such that we are in position to be marked right, we pass, and we go to the next class. Now, having talked about the role played by the Christian missionaries, I straight away wanted us to go and look at another aspect. How now did the chartered companies also contribute to the colonization of what? The colonization of East Africa. Having known that Christian missionaries came purposely to spread Christianity, they will ask you to describe the role, meaning give an activity and then after that activity, show the examiner how that led to the colonization of East Africa. Dear learners, it is my pleasure that we sail together, and this time around we start looking at the role played by what we call the chartered what? The chartered companies. The role played by the chartered companies in the colonization. We're going to use the same approach. Identify an activity, and then you show how that activity in the long run led to the colonization of East Africa. Chartered companies that we are talking about were those companies that were given what we call a license, were companies that were given a charter to come to East Africa and trade on behalf of their colonial masters. They left Britain, they left Germany, and they came to East Africa purposely to come and trade on behalf of the home government. These companies included the Imperial British East African Company. The Imperial British East African Company was formed in 1888 by a gentleman known as Sir William Macnon. This company operated in Uganda and Kenya, but on behalf of the colonial master Britain. Another company was known as the German East African Company. This company here was formed in 1884 by a gentleman known as Carl Peters. It operated in Tanganyika, but on behalf of the colonial government. Now, as a wise student of Mbogo Mix, when they ask you to describe the roles played by the chartered companies in the colonization of East Africa, this is what we shall expect you to give us. We expect that you're going to tell us what activity the Ibeco and the German East African Company played, and you also show us how that particular item led to the colonization. What roles did the Ibeco play? What roles did the German East African Company play on behalf of the colonial masters, which helped to smoothen the process of the colonization? Please don't forget where we came from. We said when they ask us for the roles, they want us to identify an activity, and then you show how that activity contributed. Before you were born, your parents took a trouble and they constructed that house where you are currently staying. So this is because they knew that at one time, when we get a daughter like you, when we get a son like you, that son or that daughter should have shelter. So they prepared and organized themselves way back before you were even born, or when you were still young. Similarly, chartered companies came and did the groundwork, preparing the way for the coming of the colonialists. That's what we want to see in our discussion. Like the Christian missionaries, chartered companies promoted what we call legitimate trade. When you check on your screen there, we are saying that they promoted legitimate trade, which in the long run was so profitable. The profits later on attracted the colonialists to come and take over, say, let us go and take over the other area where there is a booming trade. So chartered companies like the Christian missionaries also introduced and promoted legitimate trade. And you know what? This in the long run resulted into the colonization of East Africa. Chartered companies supported or promoted the abolition of what? The abolition of slave trade. they supported the abolition of slave trade, which later on created a conducive atmosphere. It made East Africa to be peaceful. And when East Africa was peaceful, East Africa could easily be colonized. Just like that time when people are organizing for exams. In preps, everyone is seated down. No one is throwing down the pens and what have you. You are seated in the library. Everyone is quiet. Why? Because they are preparing for the forthcoming exam. People are very alert. So, Christian missionaries took part in the abolition of slave trade. And when slave trade was abolished, East Africa became very peaceful. And because of the peace, colonization could easily take place. Christian missionaries as well gave information about the economic what? About the economic potential of East Africa. I have said Christian chartered companies gave reports. At times these reports were exaggerated. They added their support, telling their home governments that, you know, people, if we don't take over such and such an area, we are going to lose because this area has this, has that, and has that. This increased the appetite that the colonialists had to come and finally take over the East African countries. Christian chartered companies also went ahead and provided what we call protection. So we can say chartered companies protected the Christian what? Protected the Christian missionaries. When Christian missionaries came to operate in East Africa, in some cases there was a lot of insecurity here and there. Chartered companies now coming to play a role. Chartered companies ended up offering protection to the Christian missionaries. Yet Christian missionaries were also on the same agenda of seeing how best they were going to colonize East Africa. So we can say by providing protection to the Christian missionaries, chartered companies also share a blame. Away from that, chartered companies, as you see on your screen, also went ahead and constructed what we call infrastructures. They went ahead and constructed the bridges. They went ahead and constructed the roads, which later on is the transport for the colonialists. When the colonialists finally made their mind to come, they could easily move from one place to another. Away from that, we can also add on and we say when chartered companies ran bankrupt, what did they do? They called upon their home governments to come and take over. On your screen, you're seeing that when they ran bankrupt, they surrendered their charter to the colonials, their licenses. They went to their home government and said, we are bankrupt, we cannot move on anymore, but we are handing over the mantle to you. Just like some of us have participated in that marathon, where we run and we hand over the mantle to the next what? The next runner. You belong to Chua House, like I do. Mutesa, Mutebi, Ona Kibinge. Finally, when you're in your yellow shirt, you run and you are ahead of all other runners, but you're not allowed to complete the whole lap. So you finally hand over the stick to the next person. This is what the chartered companies really did. They had played their role. However, when they ran bankrupt and realized that they couldn't go anymore, they went ahead and handed over their areas of interest to the colonial masters. Chartered companies also went ahead and silenced rebellions. They silenced rebellions, the initial resistances. Chartered companies met a lot of resistances when they had just started operating. But because they had company armies, these people helped to defeat those initial resistances. the Kavalegas were defeated. The Kabaka Mwanga of Buganda was defeated. Even Abushir bin Salim at the coast was fought by the German East African Company. Ideally, between 1888 up to 1890, a period of about 2 years. By the time, therefore, the colonialists came, they found a very peaceful environment. Dear learners, I also want you to note that chartered companies rivaled or conflicted with one another. They conflicted among themselves. Imperial British East African Company fighting against the German East African Company. What did this cause? This eventually resulted into the coming in of the third party. The third party in this case happened to be their home government. Imagine one day if you had a very beautiful daughter or a very beautiful son, a handsome son, I beg your pardon. You look through the window and the neighbor's older boy is having a stick and is banging the head of your daughter. You're in the sitting room enjoying your chips. Would you go ahead and continue enjoying your chips? Definitely no. You would stand up, come out, and roughly intervene and ask why this boy is fighting against your son or your daughter. So this is what we are saying, that chartered companies rivaled among themselves, and this rivalry enabled or encouraged their home governments to come and intervene. Chartered companies established what we call forts and garrisons. When we're talking about the Christian missionaries, we said the Christian missionaries established what we call mission stations. Now, for chartered companies established what we call forts and garrisons, places of operation. These were later on inherited. These were later on taken over by the colonial masters where they came. They had nowhere to stay, so they ended up using the forts and garrisons that had been established by the chartered companies. Away from that, we want to say the chartered companies also, like the Christian missionaries, identified societies that were hostile and societies that were accommodative, and they gave that report to their home government. You know what happened? This helped their colonial government. This helped their home government to come well prepared, knowing which society to collaborate with and which society where to use force. Missionaries, like, I beg your pardon, we are saying chartered companies also had administrators, which administrator later on volunteered to work as colonial masters. What is it that we are saying? We are going to see that chartered companies or administrators of chartered companies later on served as volunteers, later on served as administrators when the colonial masters finally came to do it, to take over. The chartered companies provided gifts to African collaborators. They provided with them gifts such as guns. This enticed very many other African chiefs to come and collaborate. What is it that I'm talking about? Remember, we are looking at what the chartered companies did that helped in the colonization of East Africa. We are saying when chartered companies got an opportunity of operating in East Africa, they started giving gifts in form of guns to the African chiefs. This encouraged many others to come and collaborate with the colonialists. Literally, we want to end our lesson today by reminding ourselves that when we are talking about the roles or the roles that were played by the chartered companies, the role played by the explorers, we are expected to give the activity, and then we show how that activity led to the colonization of what? The colonization of East Africa. So we have so far looked at the role of missionaries and the role of the chartered companies. Now let us go ahead in the few remaining minutes that we have to look at now the roles that were played by the explorers. We have another big group that is known as the group of explorers, and identify for them as explorers what roles did they play in the colonization of what? In the colonization of East Africa. Is it only the missionaries? Is it only the missionaries? Is it only the chartered companies? No. Also, explorers can be examined. Dear learners, our formula will not change. We have said when they give you an item of missionaries, when they give you an item of the chartered companies, or when they give you an item of explorers, and they want you to come up with the roles that were played by that particular group, identify that activity or played by those people, and then you show us how that activity finally led to the colonization of East Africa. Now let's begin. European explorers were simply European travelers who came with the main agenda of discovering the unknown in East Africa. They came with the purpose of discovering many of the physical features. It was their first time to come. In your primary, they taught you about the Royal Geographical Society, the London Geographical Society, which sent explorers to Africa to come and discover the unknown. The intention was to find out about rivers, to find out about lakes, to find out about mountains, name them. These were European travelers. Now, what we want to see is who were some of those travelers. This included people or personalities such as Henry Merton Stanley, the famous Stanley. Gentlemen such as John Huntington Speke. Included personalities such as, very good, that man called Rebman. It included personalities such as Dr. David Livingstone. Included personalities such as Sir Samuel Baker and very many others. These people from time to time came to East Africa. Now, these two played various roles in the colonization of what? Of East Africa. What roles, therefore, did they play? On your screen there, you have that explorers discovered the navigable rivers. For example, they discovered River Congo. That is that man called Stanley in 1877 traveled up to River Congo. Of what importance was this to the colonization? This information was later on given to their home government. That please come. The other people, the other place has navigable rivers. This eventually eased the movement of the colonialists. So they discovered the navigable rivers. Explorers also did something. They drew maps. They drew the sketch map of East Africa, indicating the various physical features that were in East Africa. This helped in opening the eyes of the Europeans, who at first had thought Africa was a dark what? Was a dark continent. We are talking about drawing of maps at a time when nothing was known about Africa. Therefore, explorers do share a blame in as far as the colonization of East Africa was concerned. That when they drew sketch maps, these maps later on eased the movement of the colonists as they came to East Africa. Explorers also reported to their home governments, because these people were the first to come. Explorers reported about the accommodative and the hostile tribes to their home governments. As they kept on moving, they always went back home and made reports and said the Baganda are accommodative. Then the other tribe called the Nandi, they are resistors. So by the time the colonialists came, they knew what method they had to use against which tribe in East Africa. Explorers didn't stop there, but explorers also reported about the economic what? Reported about the economic potential of the East African countries. They reported to their home governments about the economic potential of the East African countries, which increased the appetite of the colonialists to come and finally take over. When the colonialists came, eventually what resulted was nothing other than the European colonization of East Africa. Some of the explorers, we are going to mention that some of the explorers, such as Henry Merton Stanley and John Speke, convinced African chiefs to invite Christian missionaries. I want to repeat. I have said explorers such as H.M. Stanley and John Speke befriended African chiefs such as Kabaka Mutesa the First, which helped, or who was now convinced to invite Christian missionaries, which Christian missionaries we have already seen above were to blame for the colonization of East Africa. Some of us who have been to the Uganda Museum, we have seen that letter that was written by Kabaka Mutesa the First in 1875. When these two gentlemen visited Kabaka Mutesa the First in 1875, a letter was written by Mutesa asking the Queen of England to send Christian missionaries. Yet we have already said the Christian missionaries were not innocent. They were also partly to blame for the European colonization of what? Of East Africa. We want to also move on and say some explorers also, such as John Speke, discovered the source of River Nile. In our previous topic, we said the colonialists wanted to take over East Africa and particularly Uganda because Uganda had a strategic, had the source of the Nile. They wanted to protect the Nile because the Nile supplied water in Sudan, yet the British were already in Sudan, and also supplied to Egypt, yet they were already in Egypt. Therefore, when John Speke discovered the source of the Nile, he quickly gave a report to his home government. This report attracted the colonialists to come, to rush, such that no other country takes over what? Such that no other country takes over Uganda, because Uganda was strategic. It had the source of the Nile. Some of the explorers later on served as administrators. When the colonialists came, during this lockdown as your home, Daddy has always had an idea of starting a supermarket, of starting a shop. Mommy has always wanted to start up a restaurant. And your home. Mommy does not have a lot of money. You may volunteer and say, Mommy, don't worry. I'll come and work. Please don't hire anyone else. In the meantime, let us first start and the business grows. Then when schooling is due, you'll find another person who will be working in my shoes. So similarly, some of the explorers whose main objective had been to come and discover new physical features, later on served as administrators. Case in point, we have that man called Sir Samuel Baker. Sir Samuel Baker came as an explorer, but he later on volunteered and worked as the initial manpower. This eventually resulted into the colonization of East Africa. Quite a number of other roles we don't need to forget that explorers, again such as Sir Samuel Baker, established what we call administrative centers. We're not going to call them mission stations, but they established what we call administrative centers for themselves, where to stay, where to keep their armies for protection. These administrative centers were later on used by the colonial masters when the colonial masters finally came and they went ahead and took over the East African countries. Also as well, explorers didn't stop there. Explorers also went ahead and reported to their home government about so many other things, such as the economic potential. We have already mentioned that. So they went ahead, okay, they also went ahead and, I beg your pardon? We have already said explorers didn't stop there, but some of them went and reported about the hostile and African kings and societies, which later on is the colonization of East Africa. We have said they built forts, they built administrative centers, which administrative centers finally resulted into the actual colonization. Now, as we try to wind up, I want to give an assignment. And in this assignment, I want you to closely try your level best and see whether you can reproduce this work. Write and you say, the question reads, the question says, the question says, describe the roles. The question says, describe the roles played by the following. Describe the roles played by the following in the colonization of East Africa. Describe the roles played by the following in the colonization of East Africa. A, we are saying explorers. B, missionaries. And C, chartered what? And C, chartered companies. I want to repeat. We said if I am to produce one of the best aces, I should write and identify an activity. And then I show how that activity, within that very paragraph, I show how it contributed to the colonization of what? To the colonization of East Africa. Then I'll get a full mark. I'll be so glad to get feedback from you. I'll be so grateful if you go ahead and try out that work. I am sure we won't go bad. It is also very fine if you feel there's something that you've not understood. You can replay this video right from the start. Follow up the various steps. I know we are handling quite some mature history, but that's the way to go. That's the way to go. We must convince ourselves that we are bright enough. We can pass this question, even when it comes to you answering your name. When I was beginning, I just told you that in 2020, Question number 7 was asking learners to describe the roles played by the chartered companies. You are very lucky that you are studying this work when you are still in this class, such that by the time we get to senior 4, we shall be very, very, very perfect. I urge you to try out that work. Please, it is very fine. Go ahead and try it out. And where you feel you need clarity, please don't hesitate. We are here to help you. We are here to assist. Look at the explorers. We have said the explorers were travelers. Their business was discover new physical features. They left England, they left France, they came to Africa purposely for that. But when they were doing their work, their findings, in one way or the other, we have said, resulted into the colonization. So the conversation I want to see is, what did they do and how did it lead to the colonization? We also mentioned that Christian missionaries, on the other hand, came purposely to convert as many people as possible to Christianity. But during the process of spreading the good news, the Christianity, they either directly or indirectly, they either knowingly or unknowingly helped the colonialists to come and take over our area. And of course, they are to blame. We cannot excuse them. When we said when they spread Christianity, in their teachings, they made Africans to become so humble, such that Africans could not do what? Could not resist. So we cannot excuse them. We have also talked about the chartered companies. The companies that were given a license to come to East Africa and trade on behalf of their home countries, on behalf of Britain, on behalf of Germany. And indeed, when this port reached here, they started doing business. But in so doing of their business, their activities in one way or the other also led to the colonization of East Africa. So I would love to see a very wonderful essay that flows, partly answering the explorers, secondly answering about the missionaries, then the chartered companies. I just want to appreciate you for being so committed to having a brighter future. Thank you so much for being on this platform. More is about to come, but I still encourage you to stay home, stay safe, and keep all the standard operating procedures. Maybe sooner than later, we shall be going back to school. I want to end here. May God richly bless you. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.